Our keynoters this morning, reporting disasters. Our speakers have seen, if not all of it, certainly a good deal of it: combat, hurricanes, aircraft accidents, and earthquakes. Kerry Sanders is a Miami-based correspondent for NBC News. Jane Darnowski is a producer for NBC News. Haiti was their story. Kerry, Jane?
So I've been reporting since 1982, and my whole career has pretty much been in Florida, which is a very good jumping off point for a lot of natural disasters, because very often they come to you because of hurricanes. So I've got a lot of years of covering hurricanes, and with NBC News, I've been with NBC News now 18, 19 years, and I've had the opportunity to cover disasters from Mitch, as far south as El Salvador, and all the way up to Montauk in Long Island, or from here down to Montauk, and covered floods, covered wildfires, covered earthquakes before Haiti in Armenia, Colombia, where as you arrive, there are still earthquakes going on. And I still remember at one point we were trying to make our way to the feed point, which is the location you take the videotape to send it out on a satellite. And the road was undulating like this, and it was like we were surfing. And the point being is, when you're covering these stories, you are experiencing these events yourself. And so you need to be prepared, whether you are a reporter or whether you're in the immediate response, the first responder community. You need to sort of have this mindset that you are not only going there to do your job, but that you are going to be living this experience yourself, which means that if you have camped a lot, it's a really good idea, because the question I get so often from people is, well, where do you stay? What do you do when you go to these places? Because, we stand there, and sometimes just to effectively present this to the audience, we will take a camera and we will walk the camera around 360 degrees. And the audience will get an idea, okay, they're not just standing in front of the one house that collapsed. Everything, as far as you can see in 360 degrees, has collapsed. So where do you stay? And you really have to be prepared for that, because that is almost incidental to your job, which will consume crazy hours and everything else. So Haiti happened, and I was in our Miami bureau when the earthquake hit, and immediately started reporting for MSNBC and NBC Nightly News, and then got a call from my boss, which I knew was coming anyway, which is, we need to get you to Haiti ASAP. 700 miles away from Miami, should be the first one to get in. Okay, Kerry? So it was late in the afternoon, and it's difficult to convince a pilot to fly you to a country that has had an earthquake where there is no communications and say, I want you to land me on the runway. They're just not going to do that. The runway might be like this. And so a lot of people have this fabulous idea that, my brother asks me all the time, so who takes care of all those things for you? They have a staff of people that arrange the airplanes and get everything for you. And it boils down to, you do it yourself. And so I have contacts in the aviation community, because I've done a lot of got to go now. And I had a plane waiting to take me. Now, at the time, NBC was owned by General Electric. And General Electric has very important kind of aviation rules that make it very difficult to have the guy that normally flies me fly me. So I had to get somebody else. And at that 2 a.m, the guy called me back and he said, I'm sorry, we're not going to go. Just too dangerous, didn't want to go. So I had to find at 2 a.m. a plane to get me out at 4 a.m. So I had 2 hours to get me out, to get me down to Haiti. And in the process, realized that we may not land in Port-au-Prince. So I reached out to a good friend of mine in Santo Domingo, and I said, if I had to fly to the other side of the island, just to remind the geography here, it's Hispaniola. Could you then arrange for a way for me to get over, do you know anybody with a helicopter? Thankfully, she did. Thankfully, she called somebody. We got in, flew by Port-au-Prince, the pilot looking out the window at 350 miles an hour, or however slow he could get it down to, looking down as we buzzed the runway, and he couldn't tell whether the runway was buckled or not. And so nobody wants to add to the disaster and become the next disaster with a plane crashing. So we went over to Santo Domingo, made our way over to where this helicopter was, and the space in the helicopter might have been about twice the size of this podium. It was not the sort of helicopter you'd normally fly in. You just wouldn't do it. You'd look at it and go, I don't know, I'm in the third world. That thing looks like an egg beater, and I don't want to get up in it. But when there's a breaking news story, you want to get to the story. You have to, in many ways, rely on what it is that your mission is, and rely on the people, in this case, that the pilot doesn't want to die either. And so there was only enough room for me and the cameraman. So it was me, the cameraman, a sound man, and a producer, and a lot of gear. So there's very little room for that in the helicopter. So we hopped in the helicopter, me and the cameraman, and we left the producer with all the gear, which includes transmission gear, because you got to get these pictures back. And she was left with the mission of trying to get a plane to fly her over there, or another helicopter, whatever. We hopped in the helicopter, we got over there. And so the very first aerial pictures that anybody saw of Port-au-Prince happened to be ours, because we had the only helicopter, we got there, and it was the first pictures that were broadcast out that sort of gave people the scope of the disaster in Port-au-Prince. And it was particularly difficult for me because I've been going to Haiti for a very, very long time. While I was down there, I added up that I'd probably spent more than a year of my life in Haiti reporting stories. And I've always found it to be the saddest nation on earth. And to see this happen was so disheartening. And that was from above before we even landed. Now, it's a race. Everybody's in a race. The first responders are in a race, reporters are in a race. Everybody's in a race to get to the disaster first for many reasons, not only to be the first one to report it, but as turned out in this case, the airport, as we all know, was pretty operational, thankfully, which meant that we could walk over to the Hertz counter and say, we need a car. So imagine there's been this horrible earthquake, and there's a guy standing there, he goes, yeah, we've got like 3. So we immediately rented an SUV. Great news. Bad news? It had about this much diesel in it. So the very first thing we did is we loaded up and drove out to go get the pictures. And it was a brand new SUV, was to start our search for diesel. Now imagine, we're there to cover this story, and the very first thing we have to deal with is diesel. So at $20 a gallon, we found some very dirty diesel that we took some cloth and poured it through to try and get some of the impurities out of it, so that we'd at least have an engine that wasn't going to seize up on us, 4 miles down the road, and began our reporting. We got there before the first responders got there, and that's logical because we have a credit card, we pay $20,000, we get on a plane and we go. First responders need to collect their teams, need to organize, need to get to the location. So very often, what we report, every first responder is hanging on every word, because they're at home in their minds thinking, okay, what is it that we need to bring? What are some of the items that we have in our warehouse that we need to prioritize, because you can't bring everything? Then the first responders arrive, and our stories turn from what we see to very often reporting what it is that the American first responders are doing, because we're just interested as Americans on what we're doing to help another country. I think we're proud, but I'd also think there's a much greater connection when we see somebody from a university or from a hospital in the United States there. What happened in Haiti was unique because you have a very corrupt government, where it doesn't matter that it is the worst disaster they've had, people are still out to make profit. So what I did is I brought a story, and if it's in the correct order, I'm going to play this story of one of our first reports with the first responders. They are trying to deal with the calamity. We'll see if it plays. Is it? Or not? All right, well, while they're setting that up, one of the things that we had in Port-au-Prince is an airport that for decades has been a profit center for the people. And so if you're in government or you're related to somebody in government, it's your opportunity out of some of the worst poverty that you could ever face. And as a result, it didn't matter that they wanted to bring in supplies from the United States to help people. The people at the airport wanted to make a buck. And it was really painful to see emergency medical supplies being held up by this bureaucracy with their hand out to make a dollar. And so Dr. Barth Green with Project MediShare in Miami, who has been probably 20 years going in and out of Haiti, working, was not going to stand by and just let that happen. But he recognized that the power of a television camera is intense. If we came along with him, it would be a lot more powerful and could probably break down some barriers. Now, as reporters, we're objective observers. Our job is not to affect, we're not there to participate. But we also have a recognition that when something's wrong, if we show it and it reveals, without any sort of editorial influence, just reveals what's going on, very often things can change and mountains can move. And so one of the things that's important for first responders, you show up and you have us there with our cameras and we're in your face with everything. In Haiti, I think the reason it worked so particularly well was because the calamity was so large and the anguish was so painful that the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the teams that showed up were so focused on helping those who were injured, they didn't really care that we were there. And I think it allowed for us to do better coverage. There was no HIPAA law standing in the way of, I'm sorry you can't get this patient's name, we can't get permission for you to be in here. And by way of example, they set up some tents that they used for their makeshift emergency rooms. And there was a day where, with the 3 operating tables going on, there was brain surgery going on here, there was another life-threatening operation going on here, and over here there's an amputation taking place. And we are standing in there, the doctors are doing their work, and nobody's like, who are they, what are they doing, they need to get out of here. Respecting the fact that we are not going to show a picture on television that is going to make somebody sick. We're not going to zoom into somebody's open head wound and show the brain surgery. But at the same time, you got a sense of the urgency of what was happening there. And I point this out because so often around day 10, maybe day 15 of an event, we return to the infrastructure and the protocols and the rules that sort of govern our society, where no, you can't be here, and hang on, you need permission to be here, and all those sorts of things start getting in the way of what we as reporters want to do, which is to tell people what's happening. Sometimes the best stories we can't tell on camera because we just weren't there. There was a doctor from the University of Miami who was asked to crawl into a collapsed structure at a school and get a girl out of there who was trapped. Her arm was trapped by the debris. And so, remember, there's aftershocks. This guy's a hero to me, and we love to tell the stories of the heroes because I think it makes us all feel good. We like to see that in this horrible situation that there are really great things going on. So this doctor goes down into the rubble, despite the rumbles and the shakes that are still happening, which means he may go down there and there'll be a resettling of the debris and crush him. And sure enough, there's a girl down there, and she's trapped. And he goes down with a tiny little scalpel, and he's going to try to take her arm off because she's stuck there. And there's just no way that this scalpel is going to work. So he comes out and he gets a bone saw and he goes down with a bone saw, and he's like, can barely move down there, and he's trying to cut her arm off with the bone saw, and it's not working. So he comes out, and as first responders have to do, he improvises. He finds somebody who has a chainsaw, and you've got the long chainsaw, and at the end, about that big on the chainsaw, you can cut if you push through. So he goes down with this chainsaw as he crawls through, and he pushes through with the chainsaw as she's in complete agony and eventually passes out, and takes her arm off. Now he has to inch her out with his arm, pulling her out of this hole, and then makes an amazing discovery. There's another girl behind her who's alive, not crushed, and has nothing trapped. And so he pulls her out, finds another woman, brings her out, and saves 2 lives. When that woman who lost her arm finally came to, wrapped up in bandages and everything else, you would think she'd look at her arm, cry, and think, my God, this has just been the worst thing in the world. She hugged the doctor and thanked him for the heroics, saving her, getting her out of there, and also that was just an arm. I have my life. We did not have a camera there. It's an amazing story that we so wanted to tell, but we didn't have a camera there. So, got a picture with the doctor, got a picture with the victim, and I wrote this for our internet, msnbc.com. I'm pointing out how the world has changed with the media. It used to be that the Today Show and Nightly News ruled everything, and that's where everybody went. After Japan's disaster, on day 1 of Japan's disaster, we had 43 million people stream videos off of NBC News on the internet. 43 million people. I mean, we have like 6 million viewers on the Today Show and 7 to 9 million viewers, maybe 10 million viewers on a regular night on nightly news. So 43 million people in a 24-hour period are just clicking there. So the world has sort of changed in the way we can present our news, and it doesn't always have to be with a camera. That said, we're in the television news business, and that's what we want to tell. So are we going to be able to play any of these videos?
Yes.
Okay. Is it me? Am I supposed to push it here?
I just need to. Huh? So then you can just pause it as you want to.
I pause it with, okay.
Yeah, just here.
Great. So it's playing.
Just up right there. And do full screen.
Five-year-old Bettina Joseph is dying from tetanus.
You can see how rigid she is?
That's the tetanus.
That's tetanus.
Doctors give her 24 hours. Same for a meal. Crushed by debris. Her organs are shutting down. Doctors say upwards of 40 patients are critical. Some, like Bettina and Emil, need advanced ventilators.
Where is that hospital with all the ventilators for her?
Well, I mean, it could be anywhere. It could be Miami, it could be Jacksonville, it could be the Dominican Republic. But it can't be here in the tent hospital.
U.S. military flights had been ferrying the most critically injured patients, mostly to Florida, only 90 minutes away. Saturday, those cargo planes left Port-au-Prince empty. The airlift shut down after Florida's governor complained the cost for treating more than 300 critical patients from Haiti overwhelmed the state's budget, and Florida needed federal money.
We're trying to make sure that we don't overburden Florida, and I think it's important that we don't.
A White House spokesman said this was not a funding issue. There was no policy decision to suspend evacuation flights. The administration is working to make sure flights resume. At the joint University of Miami Project MediShare tent hospital, anger those who need to get out are not leaving.
So if Florida doesn't want to do it, then the other 49 states need to step up.
Making things worse, Saturday, the airport director in Port-au-Prince refused to release 8 pallets of urgent medical supplies.
He wants us to pay taxes. We're a non-profit. We're not supposed to.
So what do you call those taxes?
A bribe.
Dr. Barth Green confronted the airport director.
No, there's never been an issue.
Begrudgingly, airport authorities released and loaded the medical supplies.
Humanitarian officials say this dispute is a signal. The response is now entering phase 2, an ugly phase 2. Just enough Haitian government authority to return to getting things done in this country the way they've always been done, with bribes and corruption.
With supplies in hand, now the question, will those who are dying make it out? For today, Kerry Sanders, NBC News, Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
So I brought that one because it showed Barth Green, a doctor who has a long relationship with the media in Miami, and I've known for a very long time, understanding that, bring the camera along, let us see what's going on. And I would not have known that issue had he had not said, I'm having a real problem over here, Kerry, why don't you come with me? Let's see what happens. Now, it's not our job to tell that guy to release the medical equipment, but as a human, it's obnoxious to think some guy's trying to profit off of it. So to show up and to let the camera record exactly what's going on and let that lead to what eventually happened there, personally made me feel great. I mean, it's a wonderful thing that we as the media can expose the corruption that was taking place while people are in misery. And it only happened because Dr. Barth Green understands that allowing reporters to show up and tell the story is really important. And I know that first responders in the United States, always in the back of their minds, are worried about what it is we're doing, because they're afraid that somehow it's going to expose some wrinkle in the system, or they don't want to let the ugliness of the medicine at the scene show up. We care. As journalists, we care. We want to show what's happening, and we're not there to gross people out. If there's blood all over the place, it's very unlikely we're going to show that on the air. And so I sort of ask first responders to have a little bit of trust in what it is that we do, because we're all eventually, I think, in a calamity trying to go towards the same direction. Sometimes it may feel as if we're in the way, and all you have to do is say, back off, you know? I mean, we are obnoxious by our very nature. We want to be right where it is. If somebody's, you know, removing a piece of debris that has blown into somebody's head, the cameraman may try to get there really closely. All you have to do is say, back off. That's it. It works, you know? I mean, we can get the shots that we want to get while at the same time tell the story that's so important. That story was doubly important because not only did the supplies start to flow very quickly after that, and you saw they released some right there, but also the miscommunication at the federal government level between the state of Florida and the federal government got corrected very quickly, thankfully, because of the pressure of that story, where on the one hand, the governor is talking about trying to save money for the state because he's concerned that all the patients are showing up. And the flip side of the federal government saying, but we never instituted that policy, with the U.S. military completely unaware that the planes that they were flying could no longer fly. So it happens. There's miscommunication, and clearly in a calamity on the scene, there's even more miscommunication. Another thing I want to point out just visually is you saw Dr. Barth Green wearing that shirt. A lot of his team members all wore the same shirts. And it's actually a pretty good idea, as you all head out the door and go to a disaster, to have like a team shirt, because it identifies you and it unifies you. And as much as it's Dr. Barth Green in that particular story, it's also Project MetaShare. And I know a lot of you are proud not only of the individual work that you do, but what your organizations are doing and how the organization is responding. And it's nice to get the credit for what the organization is doing. And sometimes that's just done visually with the shirts. Another thing is, it's just human nature when you're standing there. If you see a bunch of people all wearing the same shirt, you go, okay, so where are you guys from? What's your team? What's happening here? And it allows, there was a team from Utah that came in, and it was really tough for them because, you know, Haiti is a rough environment. It's hot. It's, you know, there's no water. Imagine a disaster and you show up and there's nothing to drink. I mean, you're not going to drink the local water source before the earthquake. You're certainly not going to drink it afterwards. And they were acclimated to a Utah environment, and they showed up down there, and there were doctors who were passing out, and they were looking for, where are they going to get their water supplies and how are they going to get what they needed. It was just sort of one of those kind of revelations to me that in the effort to rush there to do all of the really good work that they were doing, somebody in their logistics team had failed to think about something as basic as how are we going to supply ourselves with water. And that's why I say, you have to have had experience camping and dealing with that, because you have to start thinking about those other sorts of things in the process of going into a scene like this. I think I have another story here, which is also at the earthquake. I brought some other ones. I brought some old ones too. All right, so there's the suspended airlifts.
And now to word, a critical lifeline is being restored for earthquake victims in need of urgent care here in the United States. Those U.S. military medical airlifts suspended over the cost of care are about to resume. But in the meantime, doctors have been left scrambling for other ways to get their patients the help they desperately need. NBC's Kerry Sanders joins us now with more on that. Kerry?
Well, Lester, the American doctors here say they've been fighting two battles inside their makeshift operating rooms and on the phone with politicians, trying to get those U.S. military evacuation flights to resume. 5-year-old Bettina Joseph is beating the odds. 24 hours ago, she was losing her battle against tetanus.
You can see how rigid she is.
That's the tetanus?
That's tetanus.
Doctors feared with all military medical evacuation flights canceled, she would die here.
Even in the best of circumstances, this is a child that would be difficult to save.
But today,
Somebody got there?
amazing news. She hung in long enough for some generous Americans to try to save her life.
All right, swing around.
Partners in Health and Global Aeromedical Services donated a private air ambulance today.
We're getting the one.
Teams rushed Bettina and 2 other critical care patients to the private jet. The military airlift shut down after Florida's governor asked for federal funds, complaining patients were overwhelming his state.
I don't know the politics behind it, but what I do see on the ground is that patients are dying because of it.
Today, Florida Governor Charlie Crist clarified.
Florida has never slowed down. We never will. We're always going to help them. We just would like a little help with the financial end of things.
Inside that private air ambulance, a father who just knows these children now have a chance.
Thank you for the people of America, because it's a people who have a big heart.
Late this afternoon, all 3 young patients arrived at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Back at the Project MediShare University of Miami 10 Hospital in Port-au-Prince, Dr. Barth Green says that's not nearly enough. And you would like to see?
I'd like to see at least 20, 25 every day.
Dr. Green, his shoes still coated in blood after performing brain surgery on 7-year-old Julian Belix, says he's only asking for 1 military evac flight a day.
It's kind of personally devastating.
Dr. Barth Green got the good news just a short time ago that those U.S. military flights will resume for evacuations in the next 12 hours, established now by the White House. Meantime, Project MediShare and the Trauma Rider Center in Miami have come up with a plan in conjunction with the U.S. government to establish a permanent facility here that will be staffed included with doctors from the U.S. military. The whole goal here is to be able to treat Haitians in their own country to avoid the necessity of having to travel them to the United States. Lester?
Kerry Sanders, part of our team in Port-au-Prince. Kerry, thank you. So
the good news is Bettina, the little girl there, survived, and the doctors had never dealt with tetanus. It's just not something that you run across, even with third world people coming to the United States. It's just not a very common ailment. The important thing about the telling of that story is, I'm not sure we had a wide shot, but the tent that they had set up for this emergency hospital was, it's like the big top at a circus. I mean, it was gigantic. There could have been 3 rings going in there. Of course, there were beds everywhere. And it was the Dr. Kathy there who pulled me to the side and said, Kerry, of all the things, we've never seen anything quite like this. We've never dealt with tetanus. And I've heard about tetanus shots, but I don't know much about it. So I get my quick education and, it's the lockjaw and she's all stiff. And the reason, we focus our cameras on the individual to tell the big story. And that's what we did here. To tell the story of that little girl allowed us to broaden out to the bigger picture of there were just some people who needed to get out, and here was private money, and that private money, the first story about Bettina is what led to the aircraft coming in from Philadelphia with the private money to then get her out. So it was just the focus of that camera, and then 2 others also got out. All of them, their lives saved. Bettina's still living in Philadelphia with her family, and thankfully is able to, I think, have survived simply because we told that story. They really thought that she was going to die, and getting her on that plane really mattered. It also, if you link it, the first story to the second story, the focus of that first story, looking at what was the confusion between the state and federal government and the suspension of the airlift flights, that all changed within a very short period of time because of the pressure brought on by the telling of that story. And the only reason we could tell that story was because the doctors were jumping up and down in anger that this is crazy, that we can't get these people out, that they're going to die here. So the relationship that we have is really important, because at the end of the day, we're like professional gossips. We like to tell people, what we just heard. And so the only thing that we can tell them is what people are giving to us. When we do a medical story in the United States, it may be, I have a story on tonight. I'm not a medical reporter. I'm just a general assignment reporter. It just so happens I'm supposed to have a story on tonight, which is medically related about peanut allergies. And I went out to Colorado and we shot a story there. And when I do a story that's within the confines of a very organized kind of report, we got a study that's going to be in Pediatrics, the journal that's about to be published, and it's peer reviewed. And there's a lot of processes in terms of getting the information, because we understand it's a heck of a burden that we have, especially in medical reporting, because people hang on our every word. If we talk about a new study that suggests X, Y, and Z, people are going to hear in their minds, that's the solution. I have that. I need that to get rid of whatever my ailment is. That's my remedy. And so when we do stories in the United States in a very controlled setting, it's very important for us to recognize the power that we have. And if you're in the medical profession and you're coming to a reporter and say, hey, here's a story I think it would be great for you, when it doesn't happen, it may be simply because it doesn't fit within the structure of a story that is meaningful to the country and has some importance to all of us. In a calamity situation, the information that we need doesn't have the study, the peer review, and all that. So the statistics that we're getting are critical. We need to get those statistics from the doctors there. Now, thankfully, they had an organization there that was so big that people were gathering statistics and giving us percentages and telling us how many were surviving and how many weren't surviving. And so that allowed us to then tell back to the audience what was happening. This next story, okay. This story here is just purely on the emotional level. We'll see why the editor put this one on here.
Yeah, I want to bring in correspondent Kerry Sanders. Kerry, you took your own tour today of much of the city, and I'm assuming that was your experience as well.
Brian, we heard it over and over again today from people saying, where is the help? Where is the food? Where is the water? We can see the planes landing. Why is it not arriving to us? Port-au-Prince is a city on edge. Things are fractured, spirits are crushed, and yes, somehow people are holding it together. As dawn broke, a prayer. God help us, the women sing. Believe in the power of God. The power of prayer is about all people have left to hold on to here. Emotions are at the breaking point. The Haitian government late today said its main concern is violence. The scramble for food has turned desperate. Overnight, the UN's food warehouses were ransacked. In some places, dead bodies are now used as roadblocks to protest the lack of help.
All these people here, look at this. Red Cross don't show up. The minister don't show up. Nobody showed up here.
The relief effort is chaotic, still no central coordination. The U.S. military has the airport running and more than 20 countries have sent in aid, but getting it out is still a critical problem. Today, President Obama spoke to Haitian President René Préval to offer support.
There are going to be many difficult days ahead. So many people are in need of assistance. The port continues to be closed and the roads are damaged. Food is scarce, and so is water.
The UN says it's trying to collect enough ready-to-eat meals to feed 2 million Haitians. Benji Auguste, who still doesn't even know how many people are dead in his family, has been waiting 2 days to get gas. And you know why they're not selling that gas right now?
Yeah, because they tried to make the price go up.
The UN estimates several 100,000 are homeless, like the Antoine family, who have been sitting on their living room furniture under a tree since the earthquake struck.
And what about tomorrow and the next day? And
we will do the same thing until everything will be okay. I don't know when, but we are there living.
And around the corner, neighbors today digging out the bodies of their parents. And in Port-au-Prince today, for some, the search is not for the living, but for loved ones who they'd like to give a proper burial. The Haitian government says 40,000 people have been buried so far. At one cemetery, so many bodies have been dumped, there's no room to bury more. So today, they burned them. And up the hill, a husband prays for a miracle. All he has right now is his faith and the belief that this rescue team from Turkey can find his wife alive.
We will work together, okay, my brother?
They've heard a weak voice deep from within the rubble. What did you hear?
Person knocking back.
And friends say it sounds like Maggie, the mother of his 2 children. Well, she's strong right now, and you're strong for her, right?
Yes, she fight. She fight.
The building was a 5-story supermarket. Maggie from the Philippines was working her job at the cash register. As the search and the wait goes on here, it would seem everyone in Port-au-Prince is waiting for something. It's been silent now for more than an hour. Lowell says he won't give up hope. He asks to tap himself. He doesn't hear a thing either. But he won't leave, and neither will the search team from Turkey. The Turkish team says they will stay at it because of their experience in India. There, they found a 13-year-old girl after 7 days. She was still alive.
Kerry Sanders just back from his afternoon reporting on this story. It is.
So, unfortunately, Lowell's wife Maggie died, and they never were able to find anybody in that building, in the section that she was in, alive. They did find some people in another section of the body, of the building. The first responders there, the team from Turkey, was later joined by a team from the United States. And if we have any first responders in here who are part of those teams that are not only medical teams, but they're part of these teams that will tunnel in there, it's an amazing amount of respect that we have for what they do, because there are these aftershocks and they crawl in there. One of the things that happened while we were there was the team from Turkey and even the team from the United States, when they showed up, had no way to record what they were seeing as they were going in there, which I thought was strange because, you know, with flip videos and everything else, it's pretty inexpensive to have those. So we got some flown in, and gave some to the Turkish team as well as the American team, and told them to keep it afterwards. And then they gave us, in return, the video that they were shooting, which explained what they were going through, but also, you know, at the end of the day, we're trying to relate to the audience back in the United States what it is that people are doing. And if you're a first responder and you have an iPhone, you have a BlackBerry, you have any sort of camera that records something, put it in your bag and take it with you, because the moment that you're experiencing, as dramatic as it is something that we want to share with the whole world, and we can't be everywhere. And so in the same way that some tourist the other day had a picture of the Airbus that hit the plane in New York. There's cameras everywhere. Take a camera with you because it allows us to then get that video and help tell that story. So it's just something to consider throwing into your go bag and having with you. I brought a story here from Kosovo. This is an old one, younger and thinner, but I brought the story because I was labeled an enemy when I was in Kosovo by the Serbs because of some of the reporting that we had done that they felt was unfair reporting, and they had targeted me to kick me out of the country. And then we came across a guy who was a Serb, and as you'll see from this story, it revealed that we have no dog in the fight. We're there simply to tell the story of what's going on. The important thing about this story is, I was saying earlier about trust us. In this case, I'm working with the British military, and I'm asking them to trust us in a very volatile situation as I try to explain to them on the satellite phone where I am. Now, they've only met me 2 days ago, kind of probably remember me, but I am trying to get them to go into an area that their commanding officers are unsure might turn out to be some sort of ambush location. So I think the opportunity to build a trust and relationship, in this case, helped save a life.
Are mixed with cries of revenge and the continuing sound of gunfire. NBC's Kerry Sanders is in Pristina again tonight.
On the ground in Kosovo, chaos, with the Serbs pulling out and NATO moving in, a place of lawlessness and revenge. Everyone, Serbs, ethnic Albanians, and NATO troops, suspicious of one another, and many heavily armed. In Kosovo's capital, Pristina, this young Albanian woman grieving for 2 family members, beaten to death today, she says, by young Serbs. And this ethnic Albanian shot today, witnesses say, by Serbs. He was rescued by British paratroopers. And nearby, British soldiers themselves under attack, shoot back, killing the Serb gunmen who threatened them. Serbs now live in fear of vengeful Albanians who are returning.
My neighbor said to me, if you don't go from here, we will kill you.
On a deserted road outside of Pristina, NBC News found this Serb, wounded in the head, shot, he claims, by ethnic Albanians and left to die. He says, can't you see they tried to kill me? The 23-year-old says it's revenge. 3 ethnic Albanian men shot me, he says. Payback for the last 3 months. We called for help. British soldiers arrived to give aid.
The bullet's still lodged in his head somewhere.
The situation's so tense that even NATO troops fear for their safety.
I'm scared at the moment.
British special forces tonight are on patrol, ordered to shoot if fired upon, trying to stop this spread of violence.
That's the difficulty, NATO trying to gain control in a lawless land, taking on the role of policeman and peacekeeper in a place filled with hatred. Kerry Sanders, NBC News, Pristina, Kosovo.
So the part of the story that just can't fit, because we shoot a lot of stuff, we ended up airing this in another story, was the guy who was shot in the head was eventually taken to a local hospital, which, in a war zone, there's no electricity. It's much like any other disaster that you go to. There's very little support for anything. And I hope I'm emphasizing that enough that when you show up, you really have to be prepared to truly rough it. There is not a, let's drive 2 hours to the Home Depot and go pick up what we need and come back. You're literally going into a place that you take everything you need. Sometimes that's your food, like taking your own food to Haiti was required with Project Medishare. Those people went in, they brought their own food. The victim here who was shot in the head was taken to a local hospital and dropped off, and the local hospital did an x-ray with car batteries where they took the clamps, put it on the car battery, took an x-ray of his head, and then took him up some stairs on a stretcher because the elevators aren't working. They actually dropped the stretcher on the way up, and so here's a patient who's got a bullet in his head who was dropped, picked back up, taken into surgery, and they saved his life. And it was really weird because at one point the Serb government had us labeled as the enemies of the state and were after me. And then after that story aired, I was now a hero of the Serb government. So it was all very strange. The relationship that we have, I think, is one of mutual benefit. I think that you get the idea that the stories we're telling are the stories you want told, and that in the process, we get an opportunity to inform the nation. And while it's not the agenda, the result often is that Americans who feel the need to want to do something reach into their pockets and make it possible for you all to do what you need to do to get there. It is not inexpensive to respond, to get to a location, to be in a remote area, to have satellite phones, to get the supplies that you need to deal with the corruption. And very often it's just the typical black market situation when an economy shuts down because of a disaster. Things that would cost you a nickel cost you $100. And when it's somebody's life, you have to be prepared to have dollar bills in your pocket. And there's no credit card that they're going to run. There's no writing of a check that you can give them. There's no debit card to swipe. So you have to have all these things in your mind ready to go. And that's not just unique to reporters and first responders. It's to everybody who shows up in a situation like that. Because if you're not prepared, you become part of the problem. And the last thing you want to do is to show up at a disaster and be part of the problem rather than helping provide the solution. And you know, you're doing this for a reason. The reason that you have volunteered to get on an airplane and go to a country you've probably never been to, and a language that you probably don't know, and a culture that you don't understand, and an environment that will be daunting, is because you have it in your heart to want to go make a difference. And I think we all respect what you're doing and like to tell that. Sometimes you will be put in a situation where you just have no real solution but to deal with what happens to you. I was in Afghanistan, and this was shortly after 9/11. And while in Afghanistan, reporting from a very remote northern portion of Afghanistan, we were living in a bombed out building. Okay, so that's the only place that we could set up. We were sleeping in the basement of a building that had been blown up. And one night, as we're sleeping in these pretty cold nights, unbeknownst to me, because it anesthetized me, was a scorpion got into my sleeping bag and it bit me on my back. Didn't know about it because I didn't feel it. And about a day or so later, I'm scratching myself like this, and skin is coming off in my hand. And I'm like, what's that? So, you know, you can't see right here. So I pulled down my shirt to one of the guys, and I'm like, well, what is that? And he's like, oh, dude, that's really gross. You know, I mean, it's like it's decaying. Your skin's decaying. So we all have our first aid limited medical training, which if you're a journalist, you have to take courses. You have to understand this. You have to know how to, you know, take a tampon and shove it into a bullet wound, or you have to be able to get these basic things in your knowledge base because you will not have anybody to turn to. And so in the little medical kit that I carry, I had the Cipro, doxycycline, little alcohol pads, and so mashed up the Cipro and put it on the alcohol pad and pasted it to my back, and left it on my back there for 2 days, changing it out, and it seemingly got worse and worse. And I was like, well, this isn't going to work. I can't really feel it, but it's all falling apart. I don't want my back, you know, it's like you're thinking Ebola, you can't sleep, all these horrible things. And so I decided that what I do is just leave and go to London. Now, getting out of Afghanistan is not like catch the next flight. And so it took about 4.5 days to get out of Afghanistan to make it to London. And by the time I got to the London and I go to see the doctor and he takes a look at it, it's already cured itself, it's cleaned itself up, and the problem disappeared. And it's really just kind of like a little improvisation of putting the stuff in the medical kit together. I'll end it here before I pass it over to Jane with every once in a while we get a chance to cover a happy story, and that rarely happens, but we had that opportunity down in Chile last year. And the thing that was interesting as medical first responders for you all is there's the psychological issues that are here, there's the attempt to get the food and everything else to the people down below, but once they're all rescued and at the hospital, the international media can be obnoxious. We can be crazy, and the competition with people who have different ethics from other countries. We don't pay for news. We don't give somebody $100 and say, give me the interview. We just ask people to talk to us. These miners are taken to a hospital, and very often as a first responder, you will be at that hospital, and you will have people running around trying to slip you a camera, trying to slip in the back door. In this particular case, there were journalists who were putting on white jackets, trying to walk in as if they were medical doctors. I mean, there's just really obnoxious, crazy things that people do, all in an effort to tell a story. What we did was we asked a family member going in and said, how about if we give you a camera, and if your loved one is willing to talk to you, shoot it, give it back to us. And so in this story, we include that.
33 rescued miners, and along with all of the celebrations, new details are emerging about the desperation they faced underground and the pressures they now face above it. NBC's Kerry Sanders joins us now from Chile. Kerry, good morning.
Well, good morning. 2 of the miners are still here at the hospital. All the others have gone home, and doctors say that their eyes are adjusting to the sunlight much faster than they expected. But the longer-term issue, they say, will be mental health. 3 days after the rescues that stunned a worldwide audience, almost all of the miners are finally at home. Edison Pena, the 12th man out, was one of the first to be released. While in the hospital, he complained about the media attention. Some are bothering my family, Pena said. On Friday, Pena sought out the cameras, claiming the miners' concerns about safety were ignored. The employer, Pena said, always cares for his money. His money, and then what happens with the worker? What happens with the workers? No, just go in. All 33 men are suing the owners of the mine. And despite one report of fistfights underground, the miners appear to be closer than ever, agreeing, one daughter said, to pool all their earnings from interviews, appearances, books, and movie offers, and to divide them equally. The price for telling their story? $20 million. Fermin Gallardo, whose father-in-law, Mario Gomez, is the oldest miner, spoke up in the miners' defense, saying no one has suffered as they have. There's no amount of money for that. Chile's health minister said most will need psychological supervision and possibly medication.
We are prepared to stay with them and to work at least during the next 6 months, supporting them.
Some of the men, like Richard Villarreal, never expected to ever reach the surface. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, he said, "We were waiting for death. We were wasting away. We were so skinny. I lost 26 pounds. I was afraid of not meeting my baby, who is on the way." In the hospital, Jose Henriquez looked to the future. "I think I have to rest," he said, "and then take back my life." Henriquez now has a contract to go back to work in another mine. But first, he's taking a vacation. And they have been offered some free vacations around the world in the Mediterranean and the Greek Isles to go see soccer teams Real Madrid and Manchester United play. And one of the miners, who is an Elvis fan, has been offered a free vacation to Graceland. And Amy, who could pass that up?
All right, Kerry Sanders, thanks so much.
It's amazing. So he did get his trip to Graceland. Nobody got the $20 million. And I think that you just got a general sense of, you know, everybody wanted a piece of these guys. They were in the hospital. People are attempting to tell their story as much as they can. And I don't know, I hope that at the end of the day, you get a general sense that as reporters, we're simply there to try and tell the story that we see. And the access to that story, in many times, is controlled by you all as first responders. And so if you have a little bit of trust in us and allow us into your world, it winds up becoming a story that is so much more interesting and captivating to everybody else. The only other thing I'll add is if you're a journalism student, actually in general, but if you're a journalism student, you absolutely need to learn at least one more language. I speak Spanish, but you must speak another language because you will be dispatched to parts of the world, and understanding another language, even if it's Haiti, where they speak Creole, you will find that just over the border they speak Spanish. You'll find people who speak Spanish but don't speak English. You must find yourself the time to learn another language because it will benefit you on so many stories that you will wind up covering.